Hey guys, Zane from the Infinite Jukebox here with another quick album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Suffocation record, Hymns from the Apocrypha. Suffocation are arguably one of the most brutal death metal bands of the entire 20th century, and I don't think that many people with an above average knowledge of the genre would argue with that, for the most part at least. I mean, I'm not even a diehard Suffocation fan or anything like that, but I would be an absolute fool to deny that records like 1991's Effigy of the Forgotten and 1995's Pierced from Within pioneered a new level of heaviness within death metal that really wasn't seen before and only in recent years has been seen again. And as a whole, I would argue that once you get past the gateway level stuff like Cannibal Corpse and the first few Death albums, so long as you are acclimated to the brutality of death metal as a genre in its more heavy depths, that Suffocation is one of the first bands to check out as far as learning how the history of the genre goes. I mean, they pioneered a sound that continues to influence bands to this very day. That being said, maybe that ahead of their time kind of sound was a bit of a curse for Suffocation, considering after a brief hiatus from 1995 to 2004, people kind of stopped talking about any and all new releases they put out, instead focusing on their first few records and EPs from the early to mid-90s. And while that is understandable, those are the iconic classics of the genre, of course, most everything that they've put out since then has been on just about the same level. Maybe not quite as good and certainly not as innovative, but nonetheless, in terms of pure quality, they are damn good records 9 times out of 10. I mean, sure, you can point out some smaller things like different production styles or maybe different compositional styles, but in my eyes, the main thing separating an album like 1993's Breeding the Spawn from 2009's Blood Oath in terms of how they are viewed by the death metal community as a whole is that one came out in 1993 and the other came out in 2009. I don't really think there's that much of a difference in quality there. I think that's just an example of people looking at the classics and then saying, well, that's the band's discography. I mean, you could make the argument that 2004's Souls to Deny, their first studio album after their aforementioned hiatus's end, did get them some level of semi-mainstream-ish success. I mean, it didn't really chart or anything like that, but it was a bit more of a commercial piece of relevancy than their past records. But even then, no one really talks about that album today, despite the fact that it is, again, a damn good record and deserves more attention. That being said, the band's latest studio album, Hymns from the Apocrypha, got people talking about new Suffocation for the first time in a while outside of their cult rabid fanbase. But maybe it was for not the right reasons. It seemed like the big talking point surrounding Hymns from the Apocrypha, outside of some people being extremely hyped for it, was that it is the band's first full-length studio album with new vocalist Ricky Myers, the replacement frontman for founding longtime member Frank Mullen. And look, I get why a lot of people weren't feeling it and were worried about it. There have been plenty of examples throughout history of great bands, including, but not limited to, metal bands that had a great run for a long period of time that just got killed by the replacement of a vocalist or a guitarist or even a drummer or bassist. But here, even in the case of replacing an iconic death metal frontman like Frank Mullen, Suffocation make things work just as well as they ever have. Hymns from the Apocrypha is, in terms of performance, just as dense, just as brutal and aggressive as anything else that Suffocation have ever really put out. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that this album is quite as impressive as some of their classic records, because, again, it's not as innovative in 2023, and a lot of bands that were heavily influenced by the sounds that Suffocation pioneered have since caught up to and surpassed them in terms of what can be brought to the table as far as heaviness goes. But nonetheless, Suffocation still bring a huge amount of phenomenal riffs, and tracks like Dim Veil of Obscurity are some of the most raw and manic-sounding death metal tracks that you'll end up hearing all year. I mean, Terrence Hobbs' guitar work here is just off the charts the vast majority of the time, delivering these complex riffs that are just as headbang-worthy and just incredibly striking as they are, from a compositional standpoint, very technically impressive. And really, that's always what Suffocation has been about from a musical standpoint, balancing the brutal with the impressive. And you know what? The same thing can be said about this record in particular. Hymns from the Apocrypha is simultaneously an incredibly dense album, and also an album that you'll probably appreciate if you know anything about music theory. Not that I'm smart enough to know anything about music theory, but you get my point. In all seriousness, though, the compositional qualities of this record are really fun to dissect and look into. I mean, sure, it's a death metal record, and I do think that a lot of people who are maybe a bit on the pretentious side will pass over death metal as a genre worth analyzing from a structural standpoint. But if you need proof that it is a genre worth looking at the actual compositional techniques of, Hymns from the Apocrypha is a pretty solid example of it, and one worth checking out. I mean, the constant time signature changes here, a lot of the riffs that sound off-kilter but still fall perfectly into the solid groove that makes it so accessible for pre-established fans of death metal that are acclimated to the genre itself. It's an album that proves that, again, Suffocation are capable of doing what they've done for decades now just as well as they ever have without making it sound tired or boring. It's also nice to hear Frank Mullen pop in on the final track, Ignorant Deprivation. It's not necessarily some sort of emotional send-off for him, considering the content of the material at hand, but nonetheless, it does feel like a nice capping off of a very, very long era of Suffocation as a band. I mean, really, the Frank Mullen era is over, and that era lasted since, the start of the band. So this is an entirely new step in an entirely new direction for Suffocation, and frankly, it's one that I think pays homage to what the band have done for decades up to this point, but also happily steps into a new realm of exploration without leaving behind their roots or anything like that. Suffocation may not have any of their most beloved members left in the band, sans longtime guitarist Terrence Hobbs, as long as you specifically want to refer to the 1991 to 1995 series of members, but nonetheless, they're providing the same great tech death that we've heard from them for an extremely long period of time at this point, and we'll probably continue to hear from them for a very long time, and to be honest, I couldn't be more than happy with that. This is good stuff, and I don't think that they're going to stop putting out material on this level anytime soon, so long as they don't become like a melodic death metal band or anything like that. But I don't think Suffocation would betray me like that. So yeah, Hymns from the Apocrypha. I'm not a diehard Suffocation fan, and I found a huge amount to love about this record. So if you are a huge Suffocation fan, you'll probably fall head over heels in love with this. That's all I can really say. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this quick album review. I've been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.